go. Okay, moving right along. And we're not too badly out of time here. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Okay, I'm going to open up the hearing for HB171, establishing a moratorium on the issuance of permits for new landfills. And if I may just take a moment, I'd like to get a copy of the bill that's up there. Oh, you have it. Okay, thank you. All right, good. And today to introduce this bill to our committee is represented our one and only Representative Nicholas Germana. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back. Thank you for the record. I'm Representative Nick Germana. I represent Cheshire 15, which is Chesterfield, Hinsdale, Keene, wards 1 and 3 through 5, Surrey, Walpole, and Westmoreland. I left my copy of the bill up there, but I have distributed my written testimony. Madam Chair and honorable colleagues, last year this committee passed a moratorium on new landfills and put it on the consent calendar, and it is still a good idea. In November of last year, JLCAR issued a preliminary objection to the new landfill siting rules, citing concerns that the proposed rules were inadequate in key respects and would leave New Hampshire significantly behind other states in the region and across the country and around the world in the protections they offer Granite Staters. In December, the Department of Environmental Services returned to JLCAR to represent the rules unchanged. Our colleagues on that committee reiterated their concerns, but felt strongly that there was no further ground for action from a rules committee. Instead, they urged the legislature to address these concerns through policy action. This moratorium will give us the time to do exactly that. The primary concern raised by opponents of HB 171 is the assertion that a moratorium could result in a capacity shortfall. This is not the case. Such concerns are based on the assumption that the turnkey facility in Rochester does not apply for an expansion when its current permit expires in 2034. The operators of that facility, however, have stated publicly that they intend to do so. We still also have the Mount Carberry landfill in Success, New Hampshire, which is permitted to receive municipal solid waste until at least 2041, and DES estimates, or as of 2022, estimated that at the current fill rate, that facility may have capacity until 2043. It is also critically important to point out that this is the most powerful argument in support of a moratorium, that DES's projection for landfill capacity need is based on New Hampshire's solid waste needs. And yet we continue to import nearly 50% of what we landfill from out of state. One piece of testimony with regard to HB 215 asserted that there is an approaching capacity crisis in New England. Well, there is no capacity shortfall, let alone crisis, in New Hampshire. Our statutes do not require us to become the dumping ground for the region's trash, and our constituents have made themselves clear time and again that it is not the Granite State that they want to live in. Unless and until we do our job as a legislature and take action to address this critical issue, we should not be considering opening another landfill that is not needed for New Hampshire's solid waste needs. Our new governor has openly expressed her concerns about these issues, and with this new alignment of interests between this body and the governor, we are in excellent position to take meaningful action. We have several pieces of good legislation for consideration this year, but we do not have a bill currently before us that will address the problem of out-of-state waste. Now is the time to press pause when capacity need is not an issue and address concerns with the new landfill siting rules and the problem of out-of-state waste. I thank you for your time and consideration, and I am very happy to answer questions.
Questions? Representative King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for testifying on this bill. Assuming we were to enact a moratorium And assuming we ran out of space in state, would there be options for us to send our municipal solid waste out of state? And where would other states like Massachusetts send their waste if they no longer had an opportunity to send it here?
Thank you for the question, Representative. I neither know nor particularly care where Massachusetts would send their waste if it's not here. And currently we export about 10% of our waste. So there are, with some of our border towns, there is some solid waste going into neighboring states. I imagine that would increase a little bit. But other states, unlike us, have been very, very specific about developing regulations, particularly around the kind of waste. It's important to distinguish between the amount and the kind of waste. For example, in a number of other states, I believe both in Vermont and Massachusetts, you can't landfill mattresses, for example. You can landfill mattresses here. They send their mattresses here to landfill. So it's important to consider also when we're talking about what New Hampshire waste goes out of state. There are things that we can't send into Massachusetts, Vermont, or Maine that we do actually take in return because they have regulations in place that we do not.
Excellent, thank you.
Representative Germana, so with your reference to items like mattresses and so forth, I do want to make it known that the Solid Waste Working Group is working on, investigating programs where it would be viable for us to not landfill those things, but in ways to deconstruct them and recycle the parts and all sorts of things. And it's not only just mattresses, but there are other items that we are looking at. But to the other question that had come up regarding if we had a moratorium and at some point ran out of space to have our trash sent to, or put in, and we would have to send that trash out of state somewhere, what do you believe would be the cost to our municipalities in the event that should happen?
Thank you very much, first of all, Madam Chair, for the point about the work that the Solid Waste Working Group is doing. So it's really great that we took the action we did earlier. So, and also I know concern around, plastics and other things that we really need to divert. So I appreciate the work that group is doing. On some extent, I'm going to push back a little bit against the question because I'm not really prepared to concede the idea that it's a danger of running out of capacity need. So I'll kind of stake my ground there. That question
Fair enough.
Raises issues that I don't think are going to happen.
Okay, Representative Comtois and then Bixby.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative, for this bill. I do have a question for you. I just went to heard about our housing shortage in New Hampshire, and it's a big deal. And if we added another 100 to 200,000 people to the state of New Hampshire in the next 5 years, that is going to increase our waste. How are we going to handle that?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. To kind of take it in two parts. First, I think growth on that scale is, and I don't mean this with any disrespect, but I think is highly unlikely for a variety of reasons, including we don't have the workforce to build on that scale presently. So, I would love to see housing build up, but it will be on a longer scale, and we'll be prepared to deal with that. The other part of my answer to your question, Representative, has to do with we have to address out-of-state waste. So if we address out-of-state waste, our ability to deal with more waste produced within the state is going to grow, and I think in a very manageable way, given probably the scale that we could even hope to see housing increase.
Representative Comtois, follow up.
And thank you for that question. And I know that the numbers I gave were pretty large, but I'm looking at debris from building and things like that. So there is waste associated with building new homes and things like that. But the other question is one of the things that we've always talked about, and I thought I understood, but I was really enlightened when I went on a field trip last year to Turnkey, was that Turnkey is a private facility. So although they have to take our waste until 2034, we cannot tell them where to, as long as they can meet our capacity, we cannot tell a private company where they can or cannot take waste from. Is that correct?
There is debate. I thank you for the question, and it's an excellent question. We had a bill last year, obviously in this committee, that would say 15% is a cap. There is a debate about how far you can test the interstate commerce clause. And when I served on a study committee, we had someone from the Attorney General's office come in, and they said there are grounds on which you can challenge the interstate commerce clause. So it's an excellent question. It is an open legal question about whether or not we could draw a line like that.
Thank you. Representative Bixby, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm just wanted to get back to the capacity issue, and so I think we heard earlier today that the permitted capacity for turnkey is up through 2034 or 2034 and I believe that which is 5 years after the moratorium would end. Do you know what the capacity at Mount Carberry is, or how long that is good for?
They are. Thank you for the question. They are, and perhaps Representative Potenza has some more information. But I will say, based on the 21-22 biennial solid waste report, they are permitted to provide capacity to 2041. And as of that report, as I said, DES had estimated, based on fill rates, that it could be extended at least a couple years to 2043 with current fill rates. So 2041, potentially 2043.
Follow up?
Sure, follow up.
So it sounds like we have plenty of capacity to have a moratorium go until 2030. And just to clarify, this moratorium is only on completely new landfills. It doesn't have to do with expansions. So if it would not get in the way of turnkey starting to submit their application for an expansion.
Thank you for that clarifying question. That's absolutely right. It does not apply to expansions. And as I said, the operators of turnkey have said publicly that they intend to apply for an expansion, and that process would begin soon because it does take a little while. So yes, between turnkey and Mount Carberry, we will continue to have capacity well beyond 2030.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Representative Potenza, then Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to follow up on that in regards with turnkey, because I've had direct conversations with Waste Management about that, they would actually start the process not that soon. So I just want that to be clear. They were saying that would be 2028 and 2029 is when they would start that process. And that's what I've heard. Have you heard the same? That's really the numbers that we're looking at here for when they would start working on their application for an expansion.
Thank you. I hadn't heard those specific years, but I know that it went relatively soon. It's all relative, right? But they would want to do it a number of years ahead of that 2034 date. But so that sounds right to me.
Follow up?
Sure.
And during this time for a moratorium, do you believe that we can start really looking at, because landfills are the bottom of the barrel. They're literally what we should be, the last resort, that we could actually spend our time and focus on other different types of unbelievable technologies with recycling, incineration, and all of those things that we haven't even looked at in the state at this point?
Yes, absolutely. And we've heard some good examples here, like with the solid waste working group, the food waste diversion, which is starting next month. That was a good first step. The chair has spoken about the work that they're doing, thinking about, say, mattresses and some other things that we want to stop landfilling. And there are a wide variety of technological possibilities and policy possibilities that a moratorium would allow us to explore.
Representative Howard and then Gruber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, last session we talked a little bit about a moratorium on private applications and exploring more publicly held landfills. Would that be something that you would consider, or on all landfills?
Thank you very much, Representative. So the moratorium last year and this moratorium are across the board, public and private. The other piece that we talked about last year was the idea that all landfills going forward would be publicly owned and leased to a private operator if it was the state or a county. So those are kind of two separate issues. But in this case, the moratorium would apply across the board.
Representative Gruber?
Yes, I just want to follow up one more moment on capacity, because I understand you did not mention other landfills that could be expanded, such as the Lebanon landfill, some other sites. And second point is that my understanding our diversion goals are 25% by 2030. So that actually, do you think this would actually help push us towards those diversion goals?
Thank you very much, Representative. It's important to point out Lebanon is a public facility, and it has what's the word I'm looking for? They're not open to all sources, specifically for Lebanon, maybe what contracts they have there. So that doesn't count in terms of meeting capacity need for the state as a whole. But to your second question, yes, I think that diversion, which is supposed to be driving our solid waste management plan, the very purpose of the moratorium is to force us to really aggressively take on the issue of diversion.
Representative King?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I'm of the strong contention that the silver bullet of landfills is waste to energy plants, incineration plants. My concern with a moratorium is that, you know, it could take a few years to get the investments to build the waste to energy plant. And in order for waste to energy plants to be viable financially for the municipalities, you know, to spend their tipping fees at a waste to energy plant instead of a landfill, we have to get rid of landfills as an option. And my concern is that with a moratorium of only 5 years, that municipalities or businesses they'll feel disinclined to want to make that capital investment in waste energy plants, because they'll think, well, the moratorium's almost up here in a couple years, and then they'll just want to go right back to, you know, landfills, and then all this money that we put into the waste energy plant is going to go bankrupt. And I'm just wondering how you feel about the idea of, instead of a moratorium, just a temporary moratorium, an indefinite moratorium, where now it sends a signal to everybody who would be an investor in a waste to energy plant that, yes, we mean this for reals, and you will have the requisite trash needed to make the waste to energy plants financially viable. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Representative. I see the 5-year moratorium as a policy tool. It gives us the option to explore a variety of options while having press pause, right? So when it comes to considerations about waste to energy, for example, this is a time period in which potential investors can explore that landscape and decide whether or not it is something that they want to invest in. And there are a whole set of other policy possibilities that we could explore. So it's important to point out that is the specific purpose of this moratorium, is to provide us a window of time where we have a pause to explore multiple options.
Follow up?
Could you see that towards the end of the time frame of this moratorium, that instead we either expand the date of the moratorium or make it indefinite at the end of this term?
Thank you for the question. I don't want to speculate on that. It's certainly always a possibility, but I don't want to speculate as to what we might do in 2028 or 2029 with a moratorium. Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Barber?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative. I have a question regarding the bill. Would it be possible to add a mechanism to the bill that would require an exploratory committee to research alternatives right in the bill, rather than taking a chance that would actually happen?
Thank you very much, Representative. We've actually had a number of study committees already on this issue. I was on one. Representative Ebel referred to one a few years ago that she was on. Madam Chair has referred to the work of the Solid Waste Working Group, and they are often making recommendations. Again, our food waste diversion, which is going in next week, we came out of the work of the Solid Waste Working Group. So I don't see the need for a study committee such as you describe. I think a lot of that work has already been done, and now it's our responsibility to enact it in legislation.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for introducing that bill and fielding all those questions. I now call Representative Terry Spar. You've requested 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Terry Spar, and I just wanted to share with you my perspective and sort of echoing Representative Germana. Yes, practically half of waste in our landfills here in New Hampshire is imported from surrounding states. And why is that? Because the big players in the business have made the rules at the very expense of New Hampshire citizens. And this isn't the benign trash that we had 70 years ago. This trash these days is full of volatile organic chemicals, or compounds, PFAS, toxic chemicals, and more. In Massachusetts and Vermont, you can't landfill rugs, as was mentioned. And the reason being is because they've got PFAS in them. But guess where you can dump them? Right here. It's wrong, and all this trash will be stewing in these landfills for decades and may eventually leach at some point into our waterways. These landfills may very well become future Superfund sites. We just don't know that. How could any New Hampshire resident of sound mind aware of this issue support any action that will jeopardize themselves or their future generations and their families? Why should we residents suffer while a few people take advantage of us and reap in the millions of dollars? We must stop all new landfills, landfill permits, as the bill proposes, and cap our incoming waste from outside states. The current trajectory is a disaster. It's wrong, and it hurts every resident of this great state. We're not protecting our citizens, and we are certainly not making New Hampshire any stronger. Thank you.
Any questions? Representative Potenza.
I'm not sure if you said it or I missed it. Can you tell me what district you represent?
Grafton County, Hanover, Lyme area, right near the Lebanon dump.
Oh, wonderful. Can I have a follow-up? I was lucky to visit that landfill, which is seems to be a really good balance and design, and of course they're only taking in New Hampshire just because it's got the public piece to it. Have you spent any time in researching at all that landfill?
I have not personally. We used to take our waste there, and then we went to a service recently.
Okay, Representative King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking questions. You bring up an interesting point, which is the topic of PFAS. So, in New Hampshire, we might have bans on, let's say we enacted some bans on what could be disposed of in our landfills, but do you believe that we would still be open to, let's say we prevent PFAS from being sold in our products in New Hampshire, but products containing PFAS in other states would potentially still be dumped here, and it might be an item like a rug that you said we don't have a ban on rugs, but because our rugs don't have PFAS, their out-of-state rugs do have PFAS, and now we're inadvertently getting PFAS into our landfills. Is that what you're saying?
I went to the Solid Waste Working Group on Friday, and we absolutely have to do a better job of recycling. And I don't know where PFAS rules are and regulations, but I certainly know I think the Fed just got rid of 2 different ones or something, but we shouldn't have PFAS in our materials and our products. And whether that's just New Hampshire and we go that route, that's fine. But I don't think that we absolutely shouldn't have it be disposed of in our state.
Any other questions? Seeing none,
Thank
thank you
you.
today. Call John Swan from Safe Forest Lake up in Dalton.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak today in support of House Bill 171. My name is John Swan. I'm the founder of Save Forest Lake, and I need to preface my testimony by stating that in order to not get sued by Casella for a third time, I need you to understand that all of this is my opinion based on my research and experience. I also did want to point out for the record that online testimony, it looks like 259 citizens signed in support of this very important piece of legislation. I did send my testimony with supportive documents to the committee. I hope you received that, had a chance to take a look at it, because there's a lot of good stuff in there relative to why we need this landfill moratorium. Several times I've heard already the word crisis brought up, and that's a very good word, and I like the conversation that's been going on. This is something that can continue during this moratorium when we decide what we're going to do. We have a lot of smart people in this state, including on the solid waste working group, who could be tasked with working on this, et cetera, et cetera. However, I want to point out that we have a fantastic opportunity to prevent a future crisis. In fact, there's no time machine needed to go back in time and stop it. We can stop the proposed Granite State landfill in Dalton and Bethlehem at Douglas Drive next to Forest Lake. We have the opportunity with this moratorium to get it right. I brought a friend with me today, not really a friend, but someone I've grown very intimate with over the course of the 6 years. This is a map, a drawing of the NCES landfill in Bethlehem. And the mapping is from the July 2024 triannual groundwater monitoring report provided to DES by Sanborn Head on behalf of Casella NCS. The markups on there are mine, and I just want to show, this is a 30-year-old landfill in Bethlehem. It has grown and grown over the course of 30 years. When Casella first bought this small little, pretty much local municipal landfill back in 1993-94, they touted it as a state-of-the-art landfill that they would be building. In fact, they bragged about excavating the old unlined landfill that is here in the stage 2. It shows right there approximate extent of former unlined landfill in the box over stage 2. So they excavated that, put that into the new stage 1 area, and then DES and Casella, everybody involved, blessed the excavation. You got all the contamination, build stage 2. So it was approved. And yet today, this is the July 2024 triannual groundwater report. This is my markup on there. These are the PFAS detections according to the report from Sanborn Head submitted to DES. This is what we have the opportunity to prevent from being recreated 6 miles away next to Forest Lake State Park. As you can see, according to the data provided, and most people don't like to read the reports because they're very long. They're very entailed. I've had to learn how to read scientific data. Of the wells, there were 19 wells that had a total of 107 total different PFAS compounds detected. 8 of those had exceedance of the ambient groundwater quality standard, or AGQS. I also would want to point out that this entire landfill is sited within the watershed of the Ammonoosuc River, which is right here. It all flows northward to the Ammonoosuc River. There was a 78% increase in total PFAS levels from prior 2023, 2024 testing at 12 wells that had prior testing. I went through and did the math. 78% increase. That's pretty significant. And I will add that both DES and the owner operator and Sanborn Head have relied on the story, the alibi I call it, that it's the old unlined landfill that is causing
Mr. Swan,
contamination. Yes.
could you please direct your comments to the idea of establishing a moratorium?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically what I'm trying to say is that this would be the same owner, operator, engineers, contractors building a new landfill that's not needed nor not wanted. It's not wanted, and we have a great opportunity here with this moratorium to get it right. As Representative King spoke to, there's opportunity for other technologies that could be utilized. We have smart people in the room who can solve this problem, but please, this moratorium gives us an opportunity. We don't need a time machine to go back and fix the problem. We can. Why is this not being remediated right now? In fact, this mailer from Casella sent to the North Country touts keeping us safe in the North Country. This is a relatively new mailer, yet this speaks differently. So the point of the moratorium and the point of my testimony is that we need to learn from the mistakes of the past. This is like St. Gobain wanting another facility somewhere in the North Country. Would we allow it knowing what we know about St. Gobain today? No. And why is this not being mitigated? In fact, I have gone into the Ammonoosuc River 3 times now. There is a seep at this location. It's like a little small waterfall cascading into the Ammonoosuc River. I've tested it 3 times. I waded across, tested it last year in October, or 2023 in October, twice in 2024, June and August. All 3 lab reports came back for the same 4 to 5 PFAS compounds in that water, cascading off of the NCS property into the Ammonoosuc River. Yet the department still does not require that surface runoff going into the Ammonoosuc River to be tested. I'm the only one that's tested it. So perhaps you can ask the department another question. Why aren't they requiring that surface water runoff going off of the property into the Ammonoosuc River? Why is that not being tested for PFAS and whatever contaminants that could be in there? It's the same 4 to 5 PFAS, including PFOA. So, and that is, EPA deemed that a hazardous compound last April. So again, the point is, let's learn from history. And I think we don't need to reward a owner-operator with a new landfill when we have an opportunity to get it right next time, if we even need another landfill. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. And I call Natch Grays from BIA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nate Grays for the Business and Industry Association, the statewide Chamber of Commerce. We oppose this legislation. I at the prompting of the chair's question about the statewide working group, I should add that I probably should have added another sentence to my letter after the first sentence, just basically noting that different policy decisions by legislators, by the legislature, will determine whether or not we have our capacity estimate of 2034 is correct or not. It's possible that in addition to decreasing capacity based on something like soil standards for PFAS, which may require landfilling of soil, other options such as, banning carpets or as legislation this year would do, removing some paint from the waste stream would increase that capacity by some amount. So I just want to make sure that was clear on the record that 2034 number, I do recognize that's just an estimate. The other thing I want to point out on the capacity side of things is that DES's permitting also has a max intake So even if some facilities are allowed to continue to take waste past 2034, past whenever kind of we hit the break-even point here, that doesn't mean that's going to meet all of the need for the waste generated in New Hampshire, the same level of capacity. And I do want to point out that the capacity question is really a regional question, and it's really a cost question, because even if it ends up being the case that, you know, we in New Hampshire have to export more waste, the ultimate question is, well, how much is that going to cost people who throw away things? While we can certainly make policy decisions that reduce the need for landfilling, if we're landfilling and it turns out that we're having to truck that out to Ohio or something, you know, that's going to add additional costs. That's part of the calculus here, and part of the business analysis that waste disposal companies do when they look at, you know, are we going to open a facility like a mattress recycling facility, or are we going to apply for a new landfill? So that's all part of that overall calculus that I wanted to make sure I pointed out, which goes to kind of the overall concern we have here is not only in kind of the timing and the capacity, but the ultimate question here of the cost and the cost to businesses, which obviously produce landfillable materials, and how much that may increase depending on exactly how what policy decisions are made. I hope that was clear. I'm certainly happy to take questions if the committee has any.
Representative Bixby, and then Meyer.
Yeah, so you bring up the point that solid waste disposal is a regional issue. However, I guess one of the things that I'm wondering is if all of the states around us have put bans on particular things going into their landfills, why should New Hampshire take the burden of taking on the trash from the states that have banned it in their own states? That does not seem like a good business proposition for New Hampshire.
Well, I think that's a different issue than the one in front of you. You know, if you wanted to ban certain materials from going into a landfill, that's different than an overall ban on landfills. So to use our favorite example, PFAS, much of that is being shipped to Canada for landfilling at the moment. If Canada decides they're not taking much of the sludge collected from wastewater treatment facilities, which contains PFAS, is being sent to Canada for landfilling at the moment. If Canada decides to ban the import of sludge, that has to go somewhere else. It cannot be, for instance, land applied in Maine, because Maine has banned that. So if we make a policy decision like Maine was to make, which results in a change in how we handle that product, that's a different question than, well, can someone open a landfill or not?
Okay. Representative Minor was next. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's interesting, one of your last comments was the cost of disposing of all these materials that are coming from out of state. But correct me if I'm wrong, the cost doesn't go to the company, the cost goes to us. We pay for the disposal. It's not like these large corporations are losing money, they're in fact making money.
Is there a question there?
Yes, I'm sorry. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I don't disagree. I mean, if you're a company, you're in the business of making money, and if it's the cheapest place to put the landfillable materials is New Hampshire, then that's where you're going to ship them. I mean, that's just basic economics.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Howard was next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So waste management is a profitable business, I imagine, and your concern about cost, it has to do with your bottom line. So the fact that we are taking garbage from around, the way that you make your highest profit is taking garbage from the New England region. So we spoke to, we had a BIA person come last session to talk to us about this too. What I failed to ask her is what I want to ask you, and that is, are all business opportunities equal?
I'm not sure what you mean by that question.
I mean, profit at any cost, or at any, you know, is that does that sit well with you as an organization? And
Well, so the point I was trying to make, which I don't think I necessarily articulated clearly, but maybe a more personal example will make sense, is, you know, I live in Concord. We have a pay-as-you-throw system where we buy purple plastic bags from the grocery store, and you pay based on how much you throw out, right? And that cost is negotiated between Concord and the waste disposal company. And that cost is based on what the various waste disposal companies bid for that. So kind of at a residential level, that cost is in large part dictated by what we do with our trash. So in Concord, it goes to the Wheelabrator plant and they burn it. But you know, in other places, it ends up in different landfills throughout the state. But if it's the case that the states surrounding us are not making policies that allow them to landfill enough even to take exports from us if we run out of capacity for New Hampshire needs, then if it turns out that my trash has to end up getting shipped to Ohio, that cost is going to be probably larger than it is to get shipped up to Pennacook and burned.
but would we have to ship it to Ohio if we just stopped taking Maine and Vermont and Massachusetts trash?
Oh, I think that goes to the question of, you know, what can we do with the Commerce Clause? And I'm not prepared to answer that today.
Representative Potenza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm trying to understand a couple things. First, can we just, on the record, is Casella have a membership with BIA? So they pay dues to you?
I believe that's the case.
Okay. As well as Waste Management?
I believe that's the case.
Okay.
We have that all online, by the way. It's on our website under our
Just I'd love it
Yep.
for everybody to know for the record. Also, how are costs going to go up when we right now have more than 50% capacity that's available for New Hampshire? How are costs going up if we actually are putting New Hampshire trash first, which by the way is in every permit? Are you familiar with that? That they have to take New Hampshire. New Hampshire has to be the #1 priority. Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the basic outlines of the permitting process. I don't have an in-depth knowledge of that.
So where is the cost going to go up? I don't understand. It's kind of like you have a circular argument and it's not resonating with me. How are costs going to go up when we wouldn't have to send any of our trash out? We have more than 50% of capacity that's available designated to New Hampshire. So tell me how costs are going up and the sky's going to fall. And you keep saying the word ban. This isn't a ban. This is a pause till 2030.
So I want to go back to an earlier question you asked a prior witness, where you pointed out that I believe it was one of the facilities would be considering application for expansion in 2028 or 2029, which is, and their, if I understood correctly, their current their current permit goes to 2034, which is a 6-year period. So the concern isn't necessarily that there's the concern is that because it takes time to go through the permitting process, approximately 6 years, if I did that math correctly, for an expansion, I assume that a new landfill would take longer than that. But because it takes such a long period of time, if you have a pause for the length of time that this bill proposes, you end up in a situation where the max intake that the existing landfills can take is exceeded by the actual volume of landfillable materials generated in the state of New Hampshire. And so the question is, what happens with that extra and who pays for that? And so that's where I'm getting the cost argument is, well, if the extra ends up having to get shipped again, I'm just making it hard for people in Ohio. If it has to get shipped to Ohio, that cost of shipment is probably going to be higher, whether that's via truck, whether that's via train, than it is to go to someplace closer. Again, it depends on exactly what happens in the regulatory structure, but that's where I'm basing my cost argument, if that's helpful, Representative.
Representative Bixby.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. So, as a member of the New Hampshire legislature, it is my job to look out for residents of New Hampshire and businesses in New Hampshire, not businesses in Massachusetts or Connecticut or Vermont. And the way that our statute is written in terms of landfill capacity, New Hampshire trash has priority at the landfill, waste management is required to have that capacity through 2034 at Turnkey. Mount Carberry is required to have that capacity through 2040. If it looks like they won't be able to meet that capacity for New Hampshire trash, they have to take less out-of-state trash. Why should I, as someone who's watching out for New Hampshire businesses and New Hampshire residents, care if a Massachusetts business or Massachusetts residents have to send their trash to Ohio? I don't see how is that a benefit for New Hampshire to watch out for the people of Massachusetts.
Well, thank you for the question, Representative Bixby. Just to be clear, my testimony is limited to businesses operating in New Hampshire. That's who I represent. I don't represent businesses in Massachusetts. Whether or not they have to ship their trash somewhere else is totally irrelevant to what I'm paid to care about. And I would assume that as a representative in the legislature that you represent your constituents.
Thank you.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure that you've heard a lot of the testimony today. Would you agree that there are concerns that have been raised about a variety of issues for our landfills, for our waterways, whether we're accepting materials that the states around us don't accept, where the PFAS is coming from, where it's going? Do you think that a pause to consider some of these very important issues is unreasonable?
Well, let me frame it this way. We've had numerous study committees, as we've heard today, over the past more than a decade. We have had the solid waste working group working on this problem, and we haven't come up with a solution yet. I don't believe that a pause is going to result in a solution. It's just going to limit our options going forward.
Follow up.
Are you aware that a permit has already been worked up for the past 6 years, and this pause would not keep that permit? It would not require that permit to start from scratch. An awful lot of work has been done. And overall, I'm hearing about shipping trash to Ohio. New Hampshire doesn't have a capacity problem. That has been demonstrated through all the meetings that I've participated in. So we have to get some of these red herrings off the table. We need the pause because we've got issues that haven't been resolved. Not that we haven't been working on them, but we haven't gotten to the point we need to be in order to be secure that we can safely take New Hampshire's trash and not the surrounding states who are sending the materials that are toxic to New Hampshire residents. I don't know if there was a question in there.
Thank you for the question. I am aware of kind of the grandfathering process with permitting.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony this
Thank
afternoon. And I call Wayne Morrison, who's asked to speak for 5 minutes, but if you have heard something already said that you were planning on saying, please refrain from repeating it. Representative Wheeler, if you'd like to take your seat, you may. Oh, okay. Absolutely. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Wayne Morrison, and I am president of an organization called North Country Alliance for Balanced
Speak
Change.
closer to the. Thank you.
I want to start my testimony, Chair Aaron and Representative Germana, and all of you. I want to thank you. We've been at this for 6 years, and this is the most constructive, detailed, meaningful conversation I have heard at any point about the solid waste problems in the state of New Hampshire. So I applaud you for your willingness to wade into what is a complicated and sometimes controversial issue. And I am more optimistic now than ever before, in part because this body has been willing to wade in and try and make a difference. I have testimony that I'm sending around. I won't read it, but I would like to highlight a few points. At various points this morning, we talked about things like how much waste is generated in the state of New Hampshire. And Representative Comtois mentioned, and I know there's a big housing problem, and we're trying to do something about it. But a reality check would be, the state of New Hampshire's population has been relatively flat for the last 8 years. The amount of trash we generate in the state is roughly 1 million tons. It's maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. But you can hear all kinds of things about a crisis in the state of New Hampshire around trash. It absolutely is not the case. In fact, if you were in business and you had this kind of a flat demand situation, you would feel you'd have an incredibly efficient process to handle it, because you can pretty much guarantee how much you're going to see every year. The wild card is, unfortunately, we take in almost the same amount from out of state. And to my recollection and in our review, that amount of trash is going to go up. The conversation about Ohio has nothing to do with New Hampshire, by the way. Massachusetts doesn't just send us their trash. They send their trash on railroad cars to Ohio, to Pennsylvania, to South Carolina. They've made a decision. Literally, the train has left the station in Massachusetts. They have decided, rather than deal with that problem, they'll make it somebody else's problem. And because we're a neighboring state, and because we haven't acted sooner, we're a magnet for it. And what I've heard today is I heard words today that we echoed 3 and 4 years ago, and I can't tell you how rewarding it is to finally hear representatives of the people starting to see the same issues that we have seen. I also want to talk a little bit about the solid waste plan. Karen Ebell is a hero to me. She took on a very complicated task with a committee that was made up mainly with people in industry who have a financial interest in fighting any progress on this subject. And she has been able to make progress. That plan, the overarching goal of that plan that was handed down by the legislature, was to set an aggressive goal. You've heard the number 25% reduction by 2030. What that means in real waste is 375,000 tons if we were able to deliver it. That's the equivalent of eliminating almost any landfill in the state except the waste management one in Turnkey. That's how much trash that is. That would eliminate the need for one landfill. If we ever hit the 45% by 2050, that's 675,000 tons. It's an enormous, that's what we should be aiming at. And the reason that's important is that plan was developed less than 2 years ago. Why on earth would we not let that team that's done good work, we're just starting, the composting initiative is just starting. Why would we ever issue a new permit for a new landfill and institutionalize the same thing that we're trying to stop? I haven't spoken to anybody in the legislature or in the public. I grew up in Massachusetts. I have friends in Massachusetts. Nobody thinks what we're doing makes any sense. All we need is the backbone and the willingness to wade in and do something about it. We keep hearing about the interstate commerce clause. That is an obstacle. It's not the end of the story. Other states have figured out how to get around it. We do not have to hire private companies to run our landfills. And our goal should be, I believe our goal should really be, if we're successful, to push out as far as possible, ever having to have another landfill in the state of New Hampshire. And that's doable. It's not a pipe dream. It's not some tree hugger telling you something that we can't live with. We can do that. But rather than pouring infrastructure money into private companies who get rich and who threaten our environment, we should be putting it into composting and recycling. And we should be working back to the manufacturers. I don't know about you, but when you go to McDonald's or you go to Dunkin' Donuts and you order something, you get a plastic cup, 14 spoons, a bunch of napkins, you walk 4 feet and you throw it in the trash. And guess where that goes? That goes to a landfill. So I'm encouraged by where we are. The absolute elephant in the room in any of these conversations is out-of-state waste. It dwarfs anything else we do. If we want to meet that solid waste plan, there's 2 things we got to do. Take the food waste out and scale our composting capability. And I'm not saying eliminate out-of-state waste, but why can't we cut it in half? And one way to do that is don't license a new permit to a private operator who is on record to say that 50% of that waste is going to come from out of state. It makes no sense. Governor Ayotte went to our little lake in the northern part of this state, and in 5 minutes took a selfie, and she said, she looked around and said, "This makes no sense." And to her credit, she stood up and doubled down during her inauguration speech and said, "There will be no landfill at Forest Lake. It's a beautiful place, and we're not going to let it become the dumping ground of New England." In order for that to really happen, we need our legislators to be bold and be courageous and stand up to the interests of industry and do the right thing for the people of New Hampshire. This is an issue that's been going on for far too long, and it's not okay to just punt it down the road. We have a great opportunity. The moratorium is a perfect opportunity to fix a bunch of things that are broken. And I think that's out-of-state waste. I think that's leachate that we talked about earlier today. I think it's PFAS, and I think it's around our site selection process. We have a bunch of things. People are working hard. The DES is doing everything they can, but they're limited and they need your help. This is a policy decision. And if we can only stand up and say, what we're doing isn't working, we need to go in another direction, let's take a pause and let's fix this. Let's not be the whipping boy from Massachusetts any longer. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to call Nicole Duran. Is it Duran? Oh, Dillon. I'm sorry, I couldn't read it. Dillon, and you are from Lancaster. Thank you. Please put the mic on. Just, yep. Don't be nervous. There's a button there. Yep, there you go.
Okay.
Okay. We don't bite. We're good.
Okay. I am here to share my story and to advocate for Forest Lake. Bethlehem has saved my life. I came up from Massachusetts where I lived in a toxic luxury apartment complex. And I got very, very sick from gases there that were produced a lot from the leachate that happened from the land that was contaminated, that wasn't being supervised. And what happened was, what I'm asking you, I wrote my little notes here. I'm asking you to support this bill and the temporary moratorium while proper supervision, regulation, and enforcement is established. I moved up to New Hampshire from Massachusetts. Live free or die is no joke. My former luxury apartment complex was built on contaminated land tested by Sanborn Head, who who concluded an exemption to not report concentrations of hazardous chemicals, including lead arsenate. At that time, there was no significant risk defined by the MCP to no fault of Sanborn heads. I'm also speaking to advocate for them and the corporations because of the negligence and the lack of inspections is going to tarnish their good name, their hard work and dedication trying to figure out how to manage the waste. At that time, there was no significant risk because there was no development. In comes the property, the luxury apartment complex, that began to suffer corrosion from being built on the lead arsenate. So all the pipes, all the wiring inside the building, inside the walls, are corroding and producing very toxic gases, which is not inspected because nobody's claiming responsibility for these properties. I shouldn't say these. This one particular property is all I know for sure. It's an orphan building, and no plumbing inspection, nobody knows whose jurisdiction it is, and there's no supervision or regulation. So what happens is there's plenty of water intrusion, the sprinkler system is corroded, so there's water pouring through the ceilings. The last year I was there, I had 15 leaks in 1 year. I had leaks all 6 years that I was there. So this contaminated water is recycling inside of the building, breaking down the HVAC systems, leaking all over the rugs. So when I heard him say rugs, it put a little light bulb off in my head. Like, those rugs are going into the dumpsters that are labeled with Casella. And we're also downhill from a Superfund site where there's no drainage on the property because it's saturated in oil. So when the water does finally subside, you can see over by the playground, there's a white residue that's left on the grass. So I can't say for sure where all of this trash is going, but I do know that there are Casella dumpsters there, and I do see maintenance putting a lot of items in there that are questionable. I used to be a special ed science teacher, so I know a little bit about chemicals and gases. I became too sick, and my cognitive ability is out the window to be able to teach again. It's a miracle I can speak right now. I was having seizures and comas in my apartment. So what I'm asking you again is to seriously consider a temporary moratorium. Again, it's also for the corporations who did their best. They found an exemption. That's their business. That's what they're doing. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. That's what they did. There was no follow-up. There was no supervision. There's no enforcement. There's no one checking the building commissioner's license. There's no one checking up on the fire department, which is not to their fault. Their hands are tied behind their back and nobody can do anything. It's out of hand. So if we have a moratorium and a little bit more time and some more talk around the table to say how can we help everybody and how can we bring justice for everybody all around, from tenants, residences, and maybe things like streams that are public water supplies that are behind luxury apartment complexes like this that are contaminating our society and our children. We just need to talk about it. We need to get the word out, and we all need to communicate. What we have here is a problem of communication, and everybody's at different levels of understanding. I think that's all. I want to say I am speaking for the people, but also for the corporations and the businesses to keep their good name polished.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
very much.
you coming.
Thank you for your service.
And I only have one last pink card. That's Director Wimsatt from New Hampshire DES.
Good
Afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mike Wimsat. I serve as Director of the Waste Management Division for New Hampshire DES. And the agency is not taking position on this bill. As we often do, we do review the bill, and if we identify any concerns or observations, we try to share those with the committee. We think they're important for the committee to know about. So there are a handful of things I'd like to review, largely technical issues that I think might have an inadvertent or not work the way that the sponsor may have intended. And the first one, I'll just go through the bill. It's a pretty short bill. On lines 5 and 6, where it talks about the department accepting applications but not being prohibited from evaluating or processing them. A technicality here is that under current law, if the agency accepts an application and does not act on it and render a decision within a certain number of days, then under RSA 541A29, the application is deemed approved. And I don't think that was the sponsor's intention here. So perhaps a way to address that would be either to tell the agency it has to deny an application during this period, or it could say something like notwithstanding RSA 541A29, and then talk about the agency being prohibited from processing the application. So I just wanted to point that out. And then on line 6, again, that's that same provision there. With the prohibition, if the committee is interested in addressing some of the concerns that have been raised about, a delay in reviewing applications may be potentially causing a capacity problem, then I think that possibly the bill could instead say something like, the agency can still process the application. It can engage with the applicant to do some review for completeness and determine whether at least there's enough information there to process the application during that moratorium period, so that when the moratorium expires, it won't be like starting from the beginning. Because as I read the language now, we can accept an application, but we can't even really review it or process it in any fashion. And so, again, it's maybe more of a technicality than anything else, but we thought it was important to raise that. Also on lines 7 and 8, and there's been some testimony about this, it seems to anticipate that potentially new regulations or new technologies may come along during this moratorium period. But as we read it, this bill doesn't provide for that necessarily. It assumes that those things are going to happen, I guess, pursuant to other legislation or what have you. And it occurs that the concern would be, and I don't know if this is really a concern that's realistic, but if just this bill were to pass and then nothing happened during that moratorium period, we would then have an application, or we could then receive applications again and review them under the very same regime that we have right now. And I don't think that's the intent of the sponsor. So one thought about that would be either to include in this bill some provision for making policy changes, or including provisions like this moratorium in another bill that seeks to make changes to the regulatory framework. So that's just an observation. And then on lines 9 through 12, where it talks about nothing that the moratorium doesn't apply to expansions. There's a technical problem there because it talks about fully permitted facilities. It wouldn't prohibit us from processing facilities that have already been fully permitted for an expansion. But the reality is, because we administer the program through a system of permits, any expansion that we may have already approved an expansion, but it's not fully permitted because it has to go through design review and construction approval, operating approval. So a technicality in reading that, you could say, well, your expansion was approved, but it wasn't actually fully permitted, so you can't build it. I'm not sure that, again, is what is intended by the legislation. So I raise that as a potential technical problem. And then I guess the last of all, on line 15 of the bill, where it makes reference to public utilities, or rather perennial water bodies traversing the footprint of the landfill. I'm not really sure how or where a perennial water body would be traversing the footprint of a landfill. So we wouldn't be permitting something like that. So I'm not really sure where that's going, and I don't have a suggestion for how to fix it because I'm not really sure why it's there. So I just wanted to raise that because we're not really understanding what that is. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, Representative Gruber.
Director, thank you very much. These are very, very valuable thoughts and comments. Can we get a copy of these in writing or sit down with you and discuss how these would work specifically?
We're happy to do that. I can summarize them in a letter and then and provide that to the committee and to the sponsor.
Great, thanks very much.
Representative Potenza.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony, Mr. Wimsatt. I think that your first 2 points were right on, and I appreciate the feedback on the bill. In regards with lines 9 through 12, I think that there's a piece that is missing. It's talking about the landfill that is currently fully permitted, nothing to do with the expansion. So I think that that's just and I think it's crystal clear there. So it's not talking about a permitted expansion. It's talking about it doesn't apply for an operating fully permitted site. So
I think I understand what you're saying. I guess my only concern would be the fully permitted language is potentially a little problematic because at some level, maybe no landfill is ever fully permitted. It's an ongoing, evolving regulatory framework, and pretty much if you change your operating plan, it's a permit modification. So, and I'm not trying to be difficult with that. What I'm saying is here's the example. Let's say that committee passes the bill and they expect that any existing landfills can be expanded and aren't impacted by the moratorium, and then someone in a location where a landfill is going to be expanded doesn't like it, they may point to that and say, well, it's not really fully permitted, so you're subject to the moratorium. And all I'm suggesting is if that's not the intent of the legislature if it advances a bill like this, we want to make sure that that language is really clear and accurate and doesn't create that kind of a problem.
perfect. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, Representative Bixby.
So thank you for pointing out this set of technical issues. And would it be correct to assume that you would be available to the committee or a subcommittee to work on an amendment that would help iron these out?
We always try to be available for technical assistance whenever it's requested.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you very, very much for your testimony and some illuminating thoughts and ideas on how to improve this bill. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last pink card that I have, and we are sort of running out of time here, is Jared Sullivan, I believe, from Grafton 2. Representative, good afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for having me. I'm actually presenting the next bill, so I can sit here after I'm done talking. Yeah, anyway, so I just
But you're talking about HB.
I'm talking about 171.
171, yes.
So I just wanted to say I support this bill. I come from Bethlehem, where, as we know, one of the landfills is, and where the location of one of the controversial potential sites of a new landfill is going to be adjacent to our town, right on our border. So I think this is a great idea moving forward to try to give us a little bit of time. This has been a contentious issue in our state for years now, since before I was in the legislature, and I think some of the suggestions in the wording that was just made previously maybe can be worked into making this a little bit better. But I think all in all, this is something that we should support. We need to take a little time to make sure we get our regulations more modernized with respect to landfill siting. And I hope that the committee will take time to pass this legislation to give us a chance to do that, so that we don't have a landfill crunch in the future. We have a little bit of a runway, and I think we should not jump the gun and approve things before we really need to, and potentially put them in places that we will, that people in future generations will be regretting. So.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And can I have the blue sheet for HB 171? And also want to report that For this particular bill, the online support was 292 in support of this legislation, 6 people in opposition. On our blue sheet, we have 8 people in support of this bill. And with that, I'm going to close the hearing for HB 171.